Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Marquette University Law School, Eckstein Hall. I'm Mike Goucher, and this is On the Issues. This is our continuing series of conversations with news and policymakers, people who are doing interesting, important work in this region and beyond. Today we're going to be talking about Milwaukee's foreclosure crisis and what's being done to address it. And there is certainly news of a problem, but certainly news that is more encouraging in terms of the way this problem is being addressed. Joining me right now are three guests. We could have four. I'll explain that in just a moment, but three guests with me at this moment. Seated next to me is Willie Smith. He's the Director of Housing for the Northwest Side Community Development Corporation. Aaron Shapinski is the Housing Policy Director for the City of Milwaukee. And Mike Gossman is the Assistant Director of ACTS Housing. That's ACTS Housing, which is a nonprofit, much like Willie's agency, which is working to help put some of these foreclosed properties back into service. So won't you please give them a warm welcome to Marquette University Law School. We may be joined by Ilaria Rios, who also works for ACTS Housing. She's a housing information specialist, works directly with families who are looking to buy homes, but she's been under the weather, and she said she's going to try, but you know, if she's not feeling well, we certainly would understand that. So just in case you're wondering. So I wanted to begin by talking about how this event came to be. And it started really with a cup of coffee. Mike Gossman asked me to have a cup of coffee with him. And we wanted to talk about the foreclosure situation in Milwaukee. And you've all seen the headlines. You have some familiarity. It's a big issue in this community, big issue in many cities around this country. And as part of this discussion, Mike said to me, you know, a lot of people see the foreclosure issue as a hopeless issue. But then you went on to say that's not how you see it. You said you see something else. What do you see?
So I was an attorney in town with White Hirschbeck and wasn't too knowledgeable about the inner city, the issues it has, the opportunities that exist in it, the families who live there. And I was very lucky to meet the ACTS team. And as a volunteer, I worked and met them and saw a completely different aspect of our city than I knew, which is that in Milwaukee's inner city, you have a situation where there's very low-income families that are spending usually between $600 and $850 a month to rent. And they're doing so, and often, in some instances, also doing some of the things a homeowner often does in terms of fixing up the property, because oftentimes the landlord doesn't have the means or the desire to do that work. And at the same time, you've got a market with so many vacant, vandalized homes that if a family can get the financing and the resources it needs to put a deal together, they can save hundreds of dollars a month. And so what the ACTS team sees on a daily basis is dozens of families, you know, between 2,000 and 3,000 families each year that reach out to us saying that they want to own a part of their city. And they're not saying, I want to own in a neighborhood far, far away from where I currently live. They're inner city residents who see a deal on their block around the corner. That's a neighborhood that they understand, that they know. They see its faults, but they also see its opportunity. And every day we see families who put in incredible amounts of work to make these very challenging properties a home for them and for their kids. And so that's the hopeful side of the story. This is the best buying environment for an inner city family that I would imagine we'd see in a lifetime. And so we're doing everything we can to make sure that the families get that chance to become owners.
We'll talk about how that works in a moment, but Willie Smith, from your perspective, do you see, is it hope or is it hopelessness that you see?
I definitely see hope in the houses that we're working on currently, in the area that we're working. It's an area called Little Canada in Milwaukee. It's near the Lincoln Creek area. And we've purchased 7 houses in that area, 6 of which were owned by the city of Milwaukee. They were tax foreclosures. One of those houses was a donation from U.S. Bank. And in that area, the disparity is even greater as it relates to what individuals are paying for rent versus how much they can purchase a home for. The range is somewhere in the neighborhood from $800 to $1,200 a month for rental in this area, whereas we can sell a house, we have a house and sell it for $70,000, giving an individual a $700 mortgage payment with principal and interest, taxes, and insurance as opposed to paying $1,100 or $1,200 per month. So it's much more advantageous for anyone living in a community where if they're living in the central city and they want to be there. I mean, I don't see there being any better time to take advantage of that opportunity, considering the savings advantages that you have. And what we're doing to the properties is significant rehab. I mean, there will be no major repairs needed on these properties after we finish with what we're doing. So from the standpoint of maintenance in the future and upkeep and that kind of thing, all of those things are reduced to the point to where it's not an immediate concern. So an individual is actually able to put more money in their pocket from purchasing a house, which is great considering it's been a while since that's been the case. You know, with the exception prior to the foreclosure crisis, I mean, purchasing a house cost way more than it would have for you to rent a home in the same area, at least in the central city of Milwaukee. So I do see great hope.
Aaron, I don't want to sugarcoat this, though, because it's a big challenge. You've got how many tax foreclosed properties and then how many bank-owned foreclosures are there?
I'm happy to be the wet blanket. The city owns about 1,100, and that's as of the end of last month. And then the bank-owned inventory in the city is about 1,500. So you take 2,600 properties that are no longer owned by the people who occupy them, and those fall into varying states of vacancy, which I think really becomes the big issue. So we have another slice of maybe 2,800 to 3,000 properties that are in vacancy at any one point. And that combination of vacancy and bank foreclosure, I always call it, they're high-risk behaviors. So those two things will really gut a property very, very quickly. The city winds up, in a lot of cases, being owner of last resort. So we will pick up the property when the taxes fall behind, when it's gotten so bad that nobody wants to put that kind of month-to-month investment into even keeping the taxes up, which means that we get the worst of the worst. So that said, we've got great partners all over the place who are ready to take these homes and do exactly the kinds of things that Mike and Willie were doing.
Real briefly, some perspective on this. Is Milwaukee unique in the foreclosure problem that it's facing?
I would say we're unique in the volume, the fact that we've got a very kind of small percentage of the city's total housing stock is caught up in this problem. If you look at a city like Cleveland or Baltimore, Baltimore's got 30,000 vacant properties. The city owns 10,000 of those. I mean, they're in a situation where they're looking at, well, let's take this block and demolish it. And they literally did that with Johns Hopkins and said, we're going to redevelop this whole thing because it's 95% vacant and abandoned. Cleveland's looking at, I think, 8,000 demolitions in a city that's only got 400,000 people. So
how many demos would you be doing under the mayor's Strong Neighborhoods plan?
The Strong Neighborhoods plan funded 500 demolitions for this year. We're going to get about 400 done, and we've set out to do about 170 next year. So we had a kind of an accumulation of volume and the worst of the worst over the 3 years of the foreclosure crisis because we didn't, nobody wants to demolish a house. So we've kind of put those off, and Commissioner Dahlberg is cleaning those up now. We're going to do far fewer, and again, this is in a city of 142,000 properties, residential properties. So to do 500 in a year is not only the most we've ever done, but I'm really hoping the most we'll ever do. And it's a manageable problem for us, I think, in a way that it isn't for a lot of cities that we're often compared to.
I want to have both Mike and Willie address how this works, how your agency, for instance, Mike, we'll begin with you and then we'll come back to Willie, how you connect with prospective homeowners, how the rehab takes place. How does this work when you go into a neighborhood? And you're in what, like 3 big neighborhoods right now, or 3 sections of the city?
Correct. So 3 large inner city neighborhoods. If you look at a map of the city and you see, what are the highest crime areas, what are the areas with the lowest property values, the most other sort of negative issues, that's where we work. That's where, those are the neighborhoods where our offices are. Those are the families that we serve. We're serving the low end of the market, folks who may have never thought that homeownership was something that could ever be for them. And we take the family where they are and the inventory as it is, and we work with the family diligently to figure out if they can put in the hard work necessary to prepare for homeownership, and then work to see if they can find a home that they have a vision for. And so with some families, that can take 6 months to go through that process. Other families, it can take a much longer period of time. But the family's in the lead. Our program is merely the guide. We assume that the families are strong. And they come to us and they prove us right every day. And those families that aren't ready for the opportunity right now, they deselect. And some of them come back to us, in a year or in years later, and some don't. But we're there for the family and the homes as they are. And then what we do is we help them find a home that they're excited about. These are usually vacant, vandalized properties. Oftentimes the purchase price is $3,500. So most of our sales this year are going to be on properties that have a sale price of less than $5,000. But those homes aren't move-in ready. They require a lot of work.
The turnkeys.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a rehab management team that works with that family to design a plan around that family's budget, around that family's talents, and around that family's resources. We work to get bank capital when it exists into the deals. Sometimes there's grants available. We have our own lending program, Axe Lending, where we can lend money for rehab. And we work with families one at a time to help them navigate what, even for someone with advanced degrees, can be a very complicated process in a really challenging market. And what we've seen is we help over 100 families every year purchase a home in this way. Our team in our 3 neighborhoods works with them, gets them prepared. And what we've seen is over our history, since 1992, we've helped nearly 1,800 families purchase homes. And 77% of those families are still in the home that we sold to them over that period of time. So the success that our families have is in the longevity of their tenure. It's in the stability that brings to their family. And they report back that they find things to do with that $200, $300, $400 a month that they're saving, because these are families that are usually earning about half the county median income. So think a family of 4 earning $40,000 a year. That's our typical family, somewhere in less.
Willie, your organization, Northwest Side Community Development Corporation, it's an economic development corporation, but now you've taken on the housing part of it.
Exactly.
Tell us about your Northwest Side Impact Program. What is that, and how does it work, and how do you connect prospective home buyers with the properties?
Okay. The Northwest Impact is a program started by Northwest Side Community Development Corporation. It is technically the housing agency of the organization. The organization, Northwest CDC, never had a housing component through the years. It was always about business development, workforce development, business lending. We've lent $6 to $8 million since early 2000 to businesses in the community, looking to hire people from the community. And in doing that, the organization also has a community. We are the NSP organizers of a few areas, so we have community organizers within the community working within a small geographic areas. We've always been on the Northwest Side, and with the housing program, the issue became, well, for instance, with the Northwest CDC, the economic development side of things, the housing was a problem. How do you bring a business into an area that has a ton of boarded up houses, that has a bunch of crime, that has all of these multitude of issues that come about when you have a foreclosed vacant property sitting there?
Businesses just look at that and say, we're not even going to consider that as a site.
Exactly. And it's a problem. I mean, a lot of companies, they're investing a lot of money. They want to make sure that their employees feel safe coming to the area. And with what the agency was doing, because of the housing issue, this became a problem. It was never a problem before, but it became a problem in that this was something that was deterring businesses from moving into the area. So in Commerce, our executive director, Howard Snyder, in conjunction with WIDA and PNC Bank, we were able to borrow $4 million specifically for buying houses, rehabbing them, and helping owner-occupants to obtain these houses. It's a purchase program. We're actually looking to sell these properties, but for individuals who were not available, we're doing some limited rent-to-own. So if an individual is working with an organization like Axe, for instance, through their counseling program, and they're not yet ready to buy and one of our houses comes available, we'll work with Axe to assist this individual to rent this home, paying a small portion towards an option to purchase the property, and ultimately, through working through the counseling services, we're able to eventually sell them that house. And that's basically the big picture of what we're working with. And we've purchased 7 houses so far, all in one small area, as I've mentioned. And with that, in that area, there's probably just a few more foreclosures. So we're really just trying to be very targeted and strategic. And when I say the houses are close together, they're probably 4 or 5 blocks apart. You could walk to any one of them from any of the other ones. So, I mean, with that, as we get those complete, we're looking to just expand on that and truly make some significant impact in those areas.
So from the city standpoint, Aaron, is it possible to revitalize entire neighborhoods, or is that a little bit overly optimistic?
I think, we'd love to snap our fingers and say, oh, this is how we do it. Right. And one of the things that I think that the city's done well is we've recognized our role. What can we do, but what can't we do? And we've gone to, and this is from day one of the foreclosure crisis, we've gone to all the other people in the community and said, well, we're really good at code enforcement, and we're really good at collecting taxes. We're really good at compiling a lot of data on these things. But, rehab is, there are lots of ways to do this. We don't have to be the ones telling you how to do it, but, let's work together in your context and figure out how to make these things go forward. So, and I think it's an extension of the city's kind of overall economic development philosophy. We don't want to lead with our checkbook. We want to pull a group together and say, how do we tackle this problem? What is the problem, and how do we get to it really, really effectively?
Sure. Mike, tell me what you've seen in terms of neighborhoods, where you've been particularly active in the city.
So we think first of each individual homeowner and what's their day-to-day experience like. And what our homeowners report back to us is that if they're on a block that's doing well, and that typically is a block that has a significant portion of homeowners on it, that their daily life is going to be much better than if the alternative case is true. And so because we work with each family one at a time, we aren't necessarily focused on, okay, how do we change or how do we revitalize this whole large section of the city? It's how do we make sure that the homeowner who we sold a home to 2 years ago is going to be successful. And the way that person's going to be successful is, at least in part, going to be happy and going to want to stay there, is if we make sure that their block is strong. And we've got blocks where we've touched every single home, and you can just feel the difference. We have started doing some bus tours where we'll take individuals who are interested in learning about our work, and we'll give a little neighborhood tour. And you can go from one block to the next in the inner city. The inner city is not one place. And so we can be on a block where we've had a lot of success, and anyone in the room, I think, would feel comfortable walking down that block, would be responded to in a very nice way. The neighbors would be interested. They'd say hello to you. And you can go one block in the other direction sometimes, and it can be a very different situation. Right. And so we're going at it every day, one block at a time. And as those blocks build upon themselves, you start to experience maybe what folks think of as neighborhood revitalization. We're really focused on how do we make sure that the families that want to own a piece of the city have a good experience, and we feel like we accomplish that by just really getting micro-focused on their block.
I was struck by something that did you want to
well, I was going to say, I think that's exactly one of the advantages that we have as a city, is that we're house by house and not block by block. We don't have to reinvent whole swaths of our city. We've kind of taken this incremental approach to development and redevelopment that makes it real easy to do a good deal for a stable family on any block. And I think despite what the news leads with a lot of times, 90% of the blocks in the city are very stable places to live, and they don't make the news because a quiet day is not, not visually compelling necessarily. So I think it's easier than people think to take a vacant and abandoned house, especially, and I think Little Canada is a real striking example. And for those in the audience, I'd encourage you to take a drive up there. It's just north of Capitol off of 35th, and it's a very quiet, stable little neighborhood that you'd never know was there unless you were going there. And it's exactly what most of our neighborhoods are like, and they have 1 or 2 vacancies, 1 or 2 foreclosures. Right. And to pull that back and mitigate some of the risk that those present, I think that's the way that we stabilize and then make neighborhoods really great places.
Mike, you touched a little bit on this, but I'll ask each of you, particularly Willie and Mike. Again, connect the dots for me on how you find that prospective home buyer and the property? Do people come to you and say, I'm interested in buying a home? Or how do you identify individuals who have the best chance for success?
Okay. Well, because we, as was mentioned, we've started our program in October, so we don't have the tenure that ACTS has here.
But you've got somebody in a house already?
Oh, yeah, we've got someone in the house already. We pretty much work with other organizations for one. I mean, there are a number of housing counseling agencies who see a ton of people every day. And, you know, to work with that resource is one way that we market. In addition to that, just families within the communities where the house sits. There's always interest. People, I mean, I'm standing out there, people drive by, ask if the house is for rent or if the house is for sale. That's another way. We also do workshops for individuals who are interested in the properties as well. We are a real estate broker now, so we'll be able to market the properties that way as well. And it's about the way that my idea for what we're doing is to make the homes available to people who are already there, people who are already committed to the neighborhood. I mean, if they've rented in that area for 5 years or 2 years or however long, they're committed to that community. And I think that making that individual a homeowner takes them to the next step and helps to improve that neighborhood from wherever it's at, because they've already invested their time and for whatever reason they've decided to be there, but now they're financially vested as well. Mm-hmm. So that's a big part of it. It's kind of, and it's kind of a, I'd say more of a grassroots kind of thing in a big way. I'd like to, you know, we're trying to do that, but at the same time, we are going to do some larger marketing as well. And there are a lot of people who felt like, you know, who wants to live in these areas? Everyone lost their jobs because of the housing market. No one's working. That is absolutely not true. The majority of people did not lose their jobs. The majority of people remained at work. So what happened to all of those people who still are at work, who never lost a beat since 2008? I mean, those are the people we're trying to work towards. And honestly, I don't think that population has changed that much. I mean, it's definitely less people considering the number of people who lost their jobs, but there's still a significant number of people who are eager to purchase. I get calls constantly from individuals and families looking to purchase a home. So that I don't see as the problem at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you've said that, just what Willie Smith just said, that people are not looking to leave the neighborhood, mm-hmm. which is interesting, because I think the impression many of us in this room would have is that people would want to get away from an area that has maybe a couple of foreclosures or where they see problems associated with vacant houses. That's not been the case in your experience?
That's not what we see. And in fact, what we see is that the 1,800 homeowners approximately that we've helped purchase homes in these neighborhoods, they do our marketing for us. So I would imagine most of you, hadn't heard of Axe Housing before today. I'm not surprised by that. Our team in the neighborhoods has a big reputation, and it's not all about Axe. It's about the individual broker that's working with the family to purchase the home. So Hilaria, Mary, and Belia, they've all been with us for a very long time. Between the three of them, they've probably helped 1,400 to 1,500 families purchase home in the neighborhood. So our business works, not too different than a real estate business in other neighborhoods. If you've worked with someone and you've had a great experience and they've helped you get a home that you're very happy with, you're going to tell your friends and family. And if there's a vacant house across the street from you, you're definitely going to tell your friends and family because you're going to want them to move in across the street. And that's a lot of what happens to us is that people pull their networks and they have these, little blocks or sections of blocks. It's family and friends because the prices are so attractive. And in most suburban communities, you can't do that. It'd be expensive to convince your brother or your cousin, oh yeah, you should move next door. But the purchase price is such that our families look at that as a great opportunity. But the inventory piece, I think, is really key because the inventory's changed significantly over that 22-year history. And what we're doing today is, 75% of our deals are foreclosures. These are vacant, vandalized, very distressed properties. And although sometimes families come to us with a house across the street and they say, can you help me buy that? Now there's more work for us. We're working with the city. We've got 2 contracts with the city, and one of the contracts is so that we can spend the time to have our rehab teams go out and inventory these houses and figure out which are the ones that are really great ownership opportunities and which are the ones that another strategy is needed for. It might be that there's some other model that works, or in some cases they might need to be demolished. And so we're marrying, our rehab team's bringing that inventory into the marketplace, and then our real estate team has the network of families that are looking for their chance at ownership.
Quick question. Language can be a barrier sometimes for home ownership. People are not comfortable. I know you have people in your agency who speak Spanish, who are familiar with the Hmong culture, who, I mean, that's, I would assume, part of what you do.
I don't think there's a way to be successful doing our work if you don't have those. It's not just cultural sensitivities. I mean, you really need to be legitimately from the neighborhood. You need to actually be working with folks who you look at as your peers, and that's what our team is. I mean, we're disproportionately from the neighborhoods we serve or living in the neighborhoods we serve. We have two Hmong coworkers who have an incredible network in the Southeast Asian immigrant population. We have 3 native Spanish speakers who are working with a lot of our Latino families. And then other folks in the team that are, from the neighborhoods they're serving and have their own networks that help, drive this demand to us. Not because they're hanging flyers, but because they're seeing these people at church, they're seeing them, where they shop. They're legitimately and authentically working in the community that they care most about.
I think the perception issue is a really big one, because I think, when I talk to people about what I'm doing and what we're doing at the city, I mean, the first question is, well, what are you going to do with all these vacant and abandoned homes? And, when you tear one down, how are you going to build another one? And I think that way of looking at it, one of the things that, like Willie was saying, the flip side of 9% unemployment is 91% employment. That percentage of the workforce is out there, and there are a lot of families out there, and especially during the housing bubble, we were talking about, drive till you qualify, or how much can we afford? And now that I think the opportunity that we have with foreclosure in the city is, well, how much can I save? Right. How much can I take my rent costs? And affordable housing is a big deal in the city of Milwaukee. The market for rental, the demand is huge. The supply is average. I think most neighborhoods in the city, you're pushing that 30-40% of monthly income. If you can get that number down to 20% and set somebody up with a sustainable home ownership opportunity, however that is, and that's a great thing. That's not a risky bet at all. Mm-hmm. And I think it's just having the eyes to be able to look at the transaction that way, instead of, oh, what are we, it's all this or all this. It's no, there's all kinds of different ways that we can deal with this situation. Mm-hmm.
You want to say something?
I just, that completely, that makes so much sense. I mean, yesterday we had a meeting with Father Dennis Lewis. He founded our program. We were founded out of St. Michael's Parish, and he's still very involved, as well as he's the pastor at St. Michael's and St. Rose, for anyone who's familiar with those parishes. And he was sharing that there's waves of new immigrants that are always coming to our city, and they're not talked about very often. But right now, St. Michael's is experiencing a large wave of Burmese immigrants that are moving to our city, and he's trying to help them find rental housing, as a start. And they're spending $800, $900, $1,000 a month to rent, and they don't know that ownership is an option. Many of them have no credit. And that as far as banks goes, can make it very challenging to get financing. And I understand banks need to make money. So I'm not. But what we see is that these families are the same families, same qualities as the families that have been going through our program for 20 years. That you know it when you see it, and they're going to be successful. And so we try and give them the opportunity to realize that savings and invest it in their kids' education or in the medical care that they need, or and whatever else life brings at them.
Give me a sense of where the funding for these kinds of efforts comes from. We talked about the city certainly would prefer to have others probably do this rather than have to have the city pick up the tab for this. Where does the funding come for your efforts, or for your?
For what we're doing, half of the funds, I mentioned we have a $4 million budget that I'm working with for the housing program. And with that, $2 million came from PNC Bank, the other half came from WIDA. And basically, we're able to acquire rehab properties, and of course, it becomes a little bit challenging working with that. Some of the properties are in pretty bad shape. They've sat vacant for a really long time, And it's difficult to, make the kinds of repairs that are necessary on the properties for the budgets that we're working with. And so we're pretty much working with a lot of minority contractors from right in the neighborhoods where the houses are. And our goal in doing that was basically to allow these smaller contractors to build capacity by consistently working with these contractors over a number of properties. I mean, one contractor, for instance, More Construction, they're completing 3 properties for us right now. And because the biggest problem that these contractors have is basically continuity. They're not able to keep consistent work. So with us working with them consistently, they're able to build capacity to hire new employees, and they've actually hired a number of people and are currently training them on the job. So that's basically who our funding is through. But even with that, looking at the cost associated with some of the rehab, it can be even challenging still. And we're working with the city now. We have a home fund allotment that we have, which will allow us to do some additional investment in some of the properties where we're running short because the conditions of the properties are such that what we're working with is not significant to make the repairs.
Mike, I'll have you talk about this, and then I'll ask about that. Or do you want to jump in here?
Well, what I want to say is that, I think what the mayor and the council have done real consistently from the get-go is I've said this is a real priority for us. This is tax-based preservation. This is staying on top of the real fundamental things that make the city a good place and a vibrant place, and it's worth putting the money in. So what the mayor's committed with the Strong Neighborhoods Plan, what the council's been very supportive of, is tax levy funded investments, not just in getting properties back out and occupied, but the caretaking that goes into that, so that we don't have properties that Willie and Mike are getting that have fallen apart, and that we don't have that kind of long-term decay. And that's difficult to fund because you don't see, there's no ribbons to cut with that. It's just kind of keeping up with the daily volume. But it's, again, one of those things that the city of Milwaukee has done that a lot of other cities have said, well, I don't know if we can do that, or it may not be an attractive thing to put a lot of money into. But that's where the city's really put a lot of time and effort into, and I think where it shows, where you look at how we're doing in the foreclosure crisis overall.
Quick question, Mike, about the funding for the work that you folks are doing.
Yeah, so I think our program is we generate between 30 and 40% of all the income we need through our operations. So our rehab fees, our real estate fees, our counseling fees. And historically, the rest has been donor support. We've had support from banks. We've had support from local foundations. We increasingly have individuals in the community who have reached out to us and wanted to help and have supported us in that way. And we're talking about a budget of around 1.2, 1.3 million. The new phenomenon is that we have several government contracts. That wasn't a business we were in when we started. Candidly, I don't think that those contracts are going to be in existence forever, because it's really, there's a crisis in the city, and so we've got to pay for performance contracts. Among other things, we're going to help 156 families over 3 years purchase city-owned properties, and then another program to help counsel the tenants of the city-owned properties. So sometimes when the city takes properties, there's a tenant that's in place, been paying their rent, sometimes religiously, and when that's the case, we work with them to become an owner. The key to our model, and for it to work in good markets and in bad markets, is that these families need a guide. Even if there's not a crisis in the inner city real estate market, navigating the system is very complex. And so our families don't need handouts. It's not to say there aren't some grants that sometimes make their ways or often make their ways into deals which help, but that's on the margins. What we really need is we need to be able to provide them with the core services they need to take on a really challenging property, to get past the language barriers, to get their documentation in order. And that's a service that we hope to provide to the most struggling neighborhoods, and we hope to see those neighborhoods improve and then to look elsewhere, because if there's a thriving real estate market, we don't need to operate in that environment.
So what does this look like 5 years out? I'll ask all three of you this. Where will we be in terms of addressing the foreclosure issue in this city, and what do you need most at this point in time to expedite the progress towards solving this problem? I'll begin with you, or whomever.
I will say, for us, I'd say it's more collaboration. There are a lot of other agencies who are working in the housing field. There are a number of lenders who, have some interest in what we're doing. I just feel like if there's more of a collaborative effort, we'll be able to do much more. I mean, Axe and I've met with Carl Quindell, who's actually sitting in the back there, from Axe in regards to working out some things. So our models are very different. And in my mind, if there's other organizations who are doing something that we can somehow work together on and kind of fill in the blanks and cover each other where necessary so that we can do more as a group, that's what I think it takes to eliminate this problem. And I feel like it's definitely doable. I think it's definitely the right people at the table to do so. I just think there needs to be more collaboration financially as well as with the organizations who are actually out doing the work.
How much progress do you think we can make in the next 5 years?
That is a very good question.
I don't mean to put you on the spot. I mean, we're not predicting the future, but what's
5 years,
realistic?
5 years is a long time. I see that the numbers are starting to slip as it relates to new foreclosure filings. I mean, I could see us, taking a significant chunk out of what's out there right now, and I mean, I guess that's as good as I can say. I mean, I think that the nicer areas will speak for themselves. I believe that the private, as more of the kind of development that Axe is doing, that we're doing, that some of the other agencies are doing, you get the private sector to more jump in and decide to buy homes in the area once they see that they've improved. There are a lot of people who don't want to buy in a specific area because of what they see in that area. And as things start to change, as the neighborhoods start to look better, you'll see more people, I believe. I don't think it'll be just us that'll change this problem. We won't be the solution to this problem. We'll help. And I think in some ways we'll be the catalyst to what follows. But I do feel like it'll be the general public and it'll be the market itself that will sprout back and kind of help to eliminate this issue.
Aaron, give me your sense of what progress looks like over the next few years and what you think you really need to move things along.
I mean, the best progress would be I have a new job. We don't need a foreclosure czar in the city of Milwaukee anymore because that's fine. I would be happy to be put out of a job for that reason. Right. So
I think I'll follow him too.
I think in 5 years, I'd like to say we've made some progress on recovering the loss in home ownership levels that we saw from 2008 till now. That we've made a dent in some of the affordable housing needs in the city, that we've reestablished affordable, sustainable home ownership and really proven the value of homes in the city, period.
What is the value of keeping a home that is currently foreclosed and having it go back onto the property tax rolls?
Huge, because it's a double, it's a double win. Not only are the city and I don't want to get into the nuance, and I think we get lost in the nuance sometimes, but a vacant, abandoned property, the city's paying for it at least two ways. We take care of it in its worst state. We'll board it, we'll cut the grass, we'll do all of those things. We're missing taxes on that in most cases. Then when we own it, it's all cost and no revenue. So when we get that property back on the tax roll, we've done that 1,300 times in the last 4 years, $54 million back on the rolls for the 2015 budget, and 13 of that came in the last year. So there's a lot there. When we do that, not only are we not spending that money, but we're putting that property back out there in a real high-quality way that says it's not going to come back to us. It's going to be there on the rolls. And it may not be, mind-blowing assessed values, and it may not comp out with, a nice bungalow on the west side of Wauwatosa, but it's a good house. It was built well. It was brought back up to code, and it's a good place for a family to be. And, Mayor Barrett always says, my Healthy Neighborhoods indicator, grandmas on porches watching grandkids play, and that's how every neighborhood should look. And I think that's inestimable in value. I think we can get there in lots of different ways.
What's progress look like for you, Mike?
Well, I can see this going one of three ways. I can see an environment where, because the foreclosure crisis is less in the headlines, that there's less investment from the city, less money for groups like Northwest Side CDC or others that are doing this work. And if that happens, I think you wind up 5 years from now having a lot of homes that have been torn down. And those cost around $15,000 per home to tear them down, costs that the city would need to bear. Because I don't see those same homes that are vacant now, I hope, still standing 5 years from now empty. I don't think that's the most likely outcome because of some of the energy and intelligence that I think has been drawn to this work. And so I think the more likely scenario is that we use this as an opportunity. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity to take neighborhoods that are experiencing significant challenges and to create an opportunity for ownership in these neighborhoods. You can imagine money coming into these neighborhoods at some point, it becoming attractive for investors to purchase these homes with rental models. And we're not anti-investor. I mean, we'd rather have investor money in the neighborhoods than no money, absolutely. But what we really want is we want the neighbor to get a shot, because what we see on the blocks where we've had success with home ownership is that those strong families, they rub off on their neighbors, the block gets stronger, and you see all these positive outcomes. Right. And to get there, we need your help. This is an incredible room of people. I think I speak for all of us to say that it's just an incredible honor to even be here and be able to talk with all of you. And we need folks that want to lend their expertise to our work, and we need individuals that are willing to open up their networks and also their wallets to help us get there. And it's not a transfer of money to a family that's in need. It's really how do we level the playing field and give a family a chance? And that's what we try and do every day.
It's interesting. I should say maybe some of you saw this. Some of these issues tend to be nonpartisan. It was interesting. Senator Johnson toured a couple of the properties that you rehabbed recently, and he really liked what he saw. He liked the program. So I mean, I think there's sort of a common ground that could be found in these sorts of discussions.
I certainly hope so. We've been very fortunate to have the support of the Common Council, of President Murphy. Mayor Barrett came on our bus tour recently. I mean, for an hour and a half, he came and participated with all the other tour goers. And what I think everyone can agree on is our program cost to help a family transition from renter to owner, it's $3,000. So the cost of tearing down a home is $15,000. It doesn't matter whether you're liberal, conservative, why wouldn't you want to give that family a chance? And what we've seen is it does. It goes beyond any partisan divides, and we hope is a way to unite people around a great opportunity for families in our city.
Yeah. Anybody have anything else they want to add here? And then we'll take some questions.
You get trapped again in this kind of either or everything, very black and white way of looking at it, and there's a perception that says, well, if this place is vacant, boarded, abandoned, the market must not want it. It's valueless, which is absolutely untrue. And I think, in the interest rate environment we have now, everybody wants a return, and I think there are returns to be made on setting people up for sustainable home ownership. And I believe some of the money you got is actually, it's not giveaway money.
No, it's an actual loan.
Yeah, and the question of subsidy, I think, it's how much is reasonable, what's the effective, the cost-effective way for the public sector to maybe spur some of this development. And it may not be spending a nickel. It may be saying, yeah, we think this is a good idea and we'll guarantee part of it. Or, there's a lot of different ways to get the market moving again. And it's not that there's an absence of market activity or, that the market is always right about these things. But, there's a middle ground there. And I think you get into that middle ground, and it gets a little hard to stake out sound bites on it. So,
I just wanted to add one last thing on that. Actually, this goes back to the 5-year question. The one thing that I think will definitely improve and has improved over the time is jobs. A lot of the families that I've spoken to who have lost their homes through foreclosure, who call every day with an issue still at this point. And with those individuals losing their jobs and for there being more jobs in place for these families who lost income, the majority of people, if they were to lose their income, they're not going to be able to afford their home. So a lot of people were displaced due to that. And as that improves, as as the economic condition improves and there's more jobs. You think about the Transform Milwaukee initiative, the 30th Street corridor, the kind of work that goes into economic development type things will have a significant impact on what happens, because it is exactly that. You hear the stories, it's just amazing how many calls you get and how many calls I've had, and I'm sure you guys have had it as well, where the main reason the individual lost their home is because they lost their job that they worked at for 10 years. What were they to do in that situation? And as that improves, I think that coupled with the market jumping in and eliminating some of this inventory, that will make the difference.
Let's take a few questions from the audience. For those of you in the seating bowl, press down on the rim, not the ball, on the rim. Keep your finger down on it. We'll be able to hear you. And keep your questions brief, and we'll get to as many of them as possible. Yes, sir.
I'd like to ask a question about foreclosure prevention. Are there many banks or nonprofits doing default delinquency counseling?
I was just about to try to jump in on the end of what Willie said, because I think one of the things I missed in talking about, what do we need? From the city's perspective, it would be great to have a real good working relationship with banks, because I think a lot of times the properties we get, they've gone through, a long run foreclosure where, the bank ran out, and they're, banks like us, they're a big bureaucracy. They don't always know what the other side's doing, and, the loan goes into default, well, we file a foreclosure, and then we go. And then they get to a point with it and say, oh, wait a second, this place is vacant. The value's dropped 20% in the last 3 years. It's in a real hard-hit census tract. Maybe we don't want this one. But at that point, it's too late. And I think, one of the city's challenges right now is getting involved with the banks in that way to say, let's, pull the brakes a little bit. Let's keep this place occupied as much as we can and not get ahead of ourselves. But then when we do, let's figure out a way together to get this property back into occupancy and, back on the market real quickly. And I think foreclosure prevention is a huge part of that. I think we have a pretty good infrastructure here, but it's the number of actors and the number of decision points in any one of these transactions is so huge and so hard to get a handle on, on a big systemic basis that it becomes a big problem for us.
Mm-hmm. Let's take questions. Anybody on this side of the room? Yes, sir.
The banks kind of were the beginner, started the problem with foreclosures, and we have a lot of homes that aren't going to be fixed up. They're going to stay boarded up for a long while. What can the banks do to help maintain these homes till they can be fixed up? And then I was just reading the paper the other day that one of our new Bucks owners happens to be responsible for a lot of these boarded up foreclosed homes. And so he's coming to town and going to help us make money, and he's going to make money. What can he do to help?
Well, I can speak to the banks generally, and we have a very good working relationships with a lot of the banks in town. They're often providing mortgage loans to our families, and our partners in a variety of ways, including donating properties. So a lot of our sales are not only city-owned properties, but banks have taken properties. They don't have a disposition strategy that they're happy with, and they reach out to not just us, but Northwest Side CDC and a lot of other nonprofit partners in the community to see if it's an attractive ownership opportunity if the nonprofit wants to take it on. That said, this is not an easy problem. I mean, I know some banks I think have done a good job. I think some got in over their head and are still trying to figure out, what they can and what they need to do to help.
Yeah.
I'll add one piece to that. In the conversations that I've had with banks regarding their foreclosure inventory in the city, they have had a lot of complaints about the city of Milwaukee really being on top of them about taking care of their property. So they really try to get rid of those properties or do something with them to maintain them, because those inspectors are all around, if the grass needs to be cut, if the property needs to be boarded up, whatever the concerns are. I know they're getting those calls. I've had a number of lenders say that to me about properties in Milwaukee in comparison to properties in other cities that they may own.
Well, and we're very diligent about vacancy and foreclosure, as I mentioned before. And I was reading Pittsburgh. The city decided to enable itself to just board up a vacant structure that it did own or didn't own, and that was a big triumph for them. And we do that every week, and we're very active. I think we have a lot of the tools to deal with banks on this. I think part of the foreclosure crisis was you had a moral hazard, people passing mortgages up the line that they were not responsible for, and these are great, and that house of cards fell apart. I don't think anybody at the banks or any of their investors or owners said, we're going to let's be the biggest vacant homeowner in any given city. I don't think anybody is sitting there at a bank, in property disposition or property management or, on the lending side saying, well, how can we really screw over the city? But what we have to get to is, well, the rational business decisions that get made in any one of those private businesses, there's always an externality to it and always something that happens as a result. And we need to work with the banks, I think, to get our hands around those things. The vacancy, that foreclosure is a rational business decision up to the point when it isn't, and then it's a big problem for everybody. So how do we get the conversation started with lenders, with servicers, with everybody in the private sector to say, well, let's treat this as a bigger problem, because when it stops being a problem for you, it really starts being a problem for us.
Mm-hmm. Right. Question here.
I have two very short questions. One is in terms of previous owners who have been foreclosed upon. All of you talked about the need to have neighborhoods stabilized. So I'm wondering to what extent you work with previous owners who were foreclosed upon, who may want to return to their neighborhood. And then the second question is looking back, because much of what we talked about, frankly, is reactive. So what are the lessons learned from the foreclosure crisis? What's happening now to be more proactive in the event this happens again?
Anybody want to take a...
Mortgage brokers need to be licensed and regulated by the state everywhere. 50 states should be the reality, because I think that's where a lot of this energy started. The other thing, that I think we learned is that, the housing market affects a lot of different things. The city sees it in some ways. Our neighborhood partners and certainly all the nonprofits, housing organizations see it. We need to kind of keep in touch with each other, at least on a regular basis, and say, how are things going? What are you seeing? And should we get to the point where we're ramping up to another housing bubble? Maybe we start seeing it and thinking ahead. I know when it comes to owners kind of getting back, I think we've had one or two of those, but I think by the time that person realizes, oh, I can come back to my house, which a lot of people can, and I'll tell everybody here to tell your friends and your family, and I'll tell everybody who's watching or going to watch this, if you are in foreclosure, don't leave until you absolutely have to, because I think that process becomes a lot more fluid the farther you get into it, and the banks are much more cognizant of, how is this going to go? Those things are things that we learned the hard way this time around, and I hope next time that, A, we won't be in this situation, but B, we'll recognize, oh, this is a housing bubble, and oh, this, mortgage market's out of control, so what can we do to come in on the front end before we have to deal with vacant properties and tax-based loss and horrible unemployment?
Either of the two of you want to answer either one of those?
Just one thing on the, you mentioned something about the individuals who have been foreclosed on already. Right. In that case, because our motto is basically, we work with individuals to obtain a mortgage from a bank. And from what we've heard, I have a couple actually that I'm working with right now who was foreclosed on 4 years ago, and that is the minimum time from the foreclosure that a bank would finance them. So they're actually back at it again, looking to purchase a house in a much better financial situation, considering the property values and the interest rates of today versus what they paid for the property years ago and the interest rate at the time. So there are people returning. Different lenders have different timetables as to how much time has to span between the foreclosure and their new mortgage. So we are still working with them as well. Yeah.
I think it's interesting. You expect that banks and government, so sophisticated, so smart, that they should be able to react, and that there's all this, and what we've seen is, there's some good things happening in both those places for sure, but the families are the ones that have learned the lessons. So what we see is the families that are coming to us, and sure, they want the home to appreciate, and they're looking at it as a potential, to sell it at a profit at some point, decades down the line, but it's a value play. They want an affordable place to live for their family. And I think that, in the bubble market, there probably were different thoughts going through some homeowners' minds. And I think they've learned that lesson, and I think that they're going to remember it for a while. And so even if others don't adapt, appropriately, I think our inner city families are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Boy, all of a sudden, lots of questions. Let me go back up there. Yes, and wait for the microphone there. There you go.
Thanks. The first questioner asked about nonprofits that are equipped to deal with the foreclosure issue and to help people to hopefully avoid foreclosure. And there absolutely are nonprofits like that still in Milwaukee. We did lose a number of them due to funding issues, but there's at least 3 that are still doing it. And you can access that by going to the website of the Milwaukee Homeownership Consortium. It's called Take Root Milwaukee. So if you go to takerootmilwaukee.org, you'll have access to the nonprofits who do that work for free, by the way. It's absolutely free. It's illegal to pay money for foreclosure prevention if it's not done in the context of defending a foreclosure. But the nonprofits are there to do it for free. If you know someone who has paid money to what we call a rescue scammer, that's somebody that takes your money and then doesn't give you any service, doesn't do anything to help you to avoid that foreclosure or to get your loan modified, please have them call the Metropolitan Milwaukee Fair Housing Council. It's a private nonprofit organization where I work, and we will help them for free to file the complaints against the scammers, and in some cases we've been able to get the people's money back.
Okay, thank you. Other quick questions. How about this gentleman right there? You.
What kind of things are you doing with, you mentioned families that don't have any credit or have bad credit and getting into homes. What kind of things do you do with them, and how do you work with them to initially get the credit or to get the qualified, and then to help them to remain in good financial standing to keep up with their payments and be in a good place to stay in their housing?
So each family has different needs, and so our counseling program is based on one-on-one meetings with one of our counselors. Takes the family where they are, figures out what obstacles there are to home ownership, what type of roadmap they need in terms of personal finances to get there, and it's not one size fits all. You know, there are certain borrowers who come to us, they think, or prospective borrowers, they don't think they're ready. They've never, really thought about it. And we go through it all, and they're actually, great. They're going to be able to access credit or a bank loan. And others who require a lot of work. And so it's tough to be more specific than that, except for that, we work with that family over a period of weeks or months or years. And as much work as they're willing to put in, then we're willing to be there to support them in their efforts. But it can be a big challenge for families, and that's one of the value propositions that a number of great housing counseling agencies in the city bring for individuals who want to grow into home ownership.
Let me take 1 or 2 other final questions. Yes.
Okay. You mentioned how it costs $15,000 to demolish a home. What would cause you to choose that option, and how do you go about putting that demolished property back on the market so that the neighborhood can benefit?
I'll take the first part, and I think these guys are really good at pulling properties off the demo list. So the second question that I get after, what are you going to do with all these houses, is, well, you have all this money for demolition, why not put that into rehabilitation? I think, I mentioned this before, we're going property by property, really. And so it's one thing to say, yes, we can demolish this property. It's another thing to do it. And by the time we do it, it needs doing. We're talking about properties that have been fire damaged, properties that have been repeatedly vandalized. The copper piping, wiring has been stripped. You've got open windows and some of those things. And I've
just can't salvage them.
You can't salvage it. You can't salvage it for even twice what a reasonable amount would be, even with all the great things that ACTS and Northwest Side CDC do. And so it's, what I always say is it's not quite a one-to-one. There's not money sitting there for demolition that we're not using for other things, and we're always real cognizant of that trade-off. I think Mike and Willie know, what it takes to get a property that's got, raise order on it out. But what we try to do is demolish the properties that need demolishing. And I know Chief Flynn was here a number of months ago and has talked a lot about a public safety strategy that focuses not only on, repeat offenders, but places that generate, that become venues for crime and criminal activity and civic disorder. And Captain Smith in the 3rd District, I know, has his most wanted properties. He sends his officers out and says, these are the places. We've got the people, we know them, but these are the places that we know that there are problems with. And so let's pay a lot of attention to those. So we don't take demolition very lightly at all, but we do need to do it sometimes.
I am going to have to wrap things up right there. We want to be appreciative of your time and your busy lives. I'd just like to say thank you to everyone in the room for your attendance and your interest today, and thanks to our guests, to Willie, to Aaron, to Mike. We appreciate it. Thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you for having us.